Hi, I'm John Green. This is Crash Course U.S. History, and today we're going to discuss how World War II played out at home and also the meaning of the war. Mr. Green! So this is going to be like one of the boring philosophical ones then? Oh, me from the past. I remember when you were idealistic. I remember a time when all you cared about was the deep inner meaning of mostly girls. But you've changed, me from the past, and not in a good way. So anyway, World War II brought about tremendous changes in the United States, in many ways shaping how Americans would come to see themselves and how they would want to be seen by the rest of the world. Some of these ideological changes were a continuation of the New Deal, others were direct results of the war, but one thing we can say is that by the end of the war, the country was very different. For starters, World War II strengthened the federal government of the United States. This always happens when a country goes to war, but World War II brought about even more governmental intervention and control than we had seen in World War I. It was like the New Deal on steroids, like federal agencies like the War Production Board, War Manpower Commission, and Office of Price Administration took unprecedented control of the economy. There was massive rationing of food and supplies. Entire industries were completely taken over by the government. The federal government fixed wages, rents, prices, and especially production quotas. Like if you're looking to buy a 1942 model Ford or Chrysler, good luck, because there weren't any. The government told those car makers not to create new models that year. So basically FDR was president for life and controlled all the industries. I mean, how did this communist end up on the dime? Well, the answer is that while it might have sucked not to have a 1942 Ford, most people were just happy to be working after the Great Depression. Unemployment dropped from 14% in 1940 to 2% in 1943. Of course, 13 million Americans were serving in the military in some capacity, so that helped employment. But in general, the war kicked the American economy into overdrive. Like by 1944, American factories were producing an airplane every 5 minutes and a ship every day. U.S. gross national product went from 91 billion to 214 billion during the war. Why did this happen? Well, that's controversial, but primarily because of federal spending. Government expenditures during the war were twice the amount they had been in the previous 150 years. Combined. Although a lot of this was financed with debt, much of the war was paid for with taxes. Like the federal government began the practice of withholding taxes from paychecks, for instance, a practice I first became familiar with when working at Steak and Shake, discovering that instead of being paid, I don't know, like $100 a week, I was being paid negative $30 a week because I had to declare my tips, because my dad made me. Before World War II, only 4 million Americans even paid federal income taxes, but after the war, 40 million did. Also, big business got even bigger during the war because of government contracts. Cost-plus contracts guaranteed that companies would make a profit, and the lion's share of contracts went to the biggest businesses. So by the war's end, the 200 biggest American corporations controlled half of all of America's corporate assets. And all this government spending also spurred development, like defense spending basically created the West Coast as an industrial center. Seattle became a shipping and aircraft manufacturing hub, and California got 10% of all federal spending. And Los Angeles became the second largest manufacturing center in the country, meaning that it was not, in fact, built by Hollywood. It was built by World War II. All of this was pretty bad for the South, by the way, because most of this industrialization happened in cities, and the South only had 2 cities with more than 500,000 people. And organized labor continued to grow as well, with union membership soaring from around 9 million in 1940 to almost 15 million in 1945. Besides union-friendly New Deal policies, the government forced employers to recognize unions in order to prevent labor strife and keep the factories humming so that war production would not decrease. And from a human history standpoint, one of the biggest changes is that many of the workers in those factories were women. You've probably seen this picture of Rosie the Riveter, and while there wasn't actually a riveter named Rosie, or maybe there was, but she's an amalgam. But by 1944, women made up 1/3 of the civilian labor force, in addition to the 350,000 who were serving in the military. And the type of women who were working changed as well. Married women in their 30s outnumbered single women in the workforce. But the government and employers both saw this phenomenon as temporary. So when the war was over, most women workers, especially those in high-paying industrial jobs, were let go. This was especially hard on working-class women who needed to work to survive and had to return to lower-paid work as domestics or in food services or, God forbid, as teachers. Now it's time for the mystery document. The rules here are simple. We use primary sources for learning, as this is a serious show about history, and then if I guess the author wrong, I get shocked. Okay, what do we got today? Let's take a look. Certainly there is no time for any of us to stop thinking about the social and economic problems which are the root cause of the social revolution, which is today a supreme factor in the world. For there is nothing mysterious about the foundations of a